The entire first-class cabin fell silent as Jaden Washington, a 12-year-old black boy from South Chicago in worn-out clothes, knelt beside billionaire Maxwell Harrison's screaming autistic son. Nobody expected what happened next, a simple connection that would eventually expose a 30-year cover-up and change both families' lives forever. Before we dive into this incredible story of connection across divides, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you believe in the power of unexpected kindness, and subscribe to hear more stories that will change how you see the world around you. Now, let's see how a chance encounter at 30,000 feet altered the course of multiple lives. The exclusive first-class cabin of Flight 2187 from New York to Los Angeles buzzed with the usual pre-takeoff energy. Business executives tapped away on laptops, celebrities hid behind designer sunglasses, and flight attendants moved efficiently through the cabin with pre-departure beverages. Wesley Harrison, 45 and impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit that subtly announced his status, guided his 7-year-old son Ethan down the aisle. As the founder and CEO of Harrison Innovations, Wesley's face occasionally graced the covers of business magazines and tech blogs. Today, that face showed strain as he helped his son find their seats. "Mr. Harrison. Welcome aboard," greeted flight attendant Alicia Davis, a 34-year-old veteran of the airline with perfectly coiffed hair and a genuine smile. "It's wonderful to see you again. And this must be Ethan." Ethan didn't respond or make eye contact. He clutched a small blue fidget spinner in one hand and a worn stuffed dinosaur in the other. Wesley nodded appreciatively at Alicia. "Thank you. Window seat as requested, and I've noted Ethan's dietary restrictions," she continued professionally. "Can I get you anything before takeoff? Perhaps apple juice for the young man?" Wesley settled Ethan by the window, arranging his tablet, headphones, and comfort items carefully on the tray table. "Apple juice would be perfect, thank you. And maybe a sparkling water for me." As Alicia moved away, Wesley noticed the glances from other passengers. He was used to recognition, but these looks held something else, curiosity tinged with apprehension as they observed Ethan rocking slightly in his seat. 2 rows behind them, investment banker Samuel Palmer leaned toward his colleague. "That's Wesley Harrison," he whispered too loudly. "Heard his wife left him last year. Couldn't handle the kids' issues. Now he drags the poor thing everywhere instead of leaving him with qualified professionals." Wesley pretended not to hear, focusing instead on setting up Ethan's noise-canceling headphones. The divorce from Charlotte had been finalized 8 months ago, and the gossip still followed him like a shadow. Meanwhile, in the economy section of the same aircraft, Tanya Washington, 38, guided her 12-year-old son Jaden down the narrow aisle. Her nurse's uniform was neatly pressed despite her having come directly from an overnight shift at South Chicago Memorial Hospital. "Remember what I said, Jaden. Best behavior, okay? This is a special trip." Her voice was tired but warm as she squeezed his shoulder. Jaden nodded, his bright eyes taking in every detail of the aircraft. "I know, Mom. I'll be good." He clutched his backpack, frayed at the edges but meticulously packed with library books, a sketchpad, and his prized colored pencils received last Christmas. Flight attendant Keith Peterson, a 30-year-old with a pressed uniform and a practiced smile, intercepted them before they reached their row. "Boarding passes, please." His tone carried an edge absent when he'd greeted previous passengers. Tanya presented their documents, which Keith scrutinized longer than necessary. "You're sure this is your flight? Row 32. "Yes," Tanya replied evenly, having anticipated this interaction. After 12 years of raising Jaden alone, she'd developed an armor against such microaggressions. "We've checked in already." From nearby seats, a woman in designer clothes whispered to her husband, "They're letting anyone fly these days. I paid too much to be surrounded by those people." Jaden pretended not to hear, but Tanya noticed his shoulders tense. She guided him forward with a gentle hand on his back. As they moved past the first-class cabin toward their seats, Jaden's attention was caught by Ethan's fidget spinner. He smiled, recognizing the toy similar to one his friend from school used. Ethan didn't notice, focused entirely on the spinning blue blur in his hands. "Come on, honey," Tanya urged quietly, pulling Jaden along. They found their seats in the crowded economy section, middle and window in a row of 3. Tanya had saved for 6 months for these tickets, working double shifts at the hospital and picking up weekend hours at the neighborhood clinic. Her mother in Los Angeles had been diagnosed with early-stage cancer, and this visit might be their last chance to spend quality time together. "You can have the window," Tanya offered, though she knew Jaden would have insisted anyway. His face lit up as he slid past her and pressed his nose against the plexiglass. As the final passengers boarded, Ethan Harrison began to show signs of increasing anxiety. His rocking intensified, and he started humming, quietly at first, then louder. Wesley leaned close, speaking softly into his son's ear and adjusting the headphones, trying to head off what he feared might be coming. Back in economy, Tanya settled into her seat with a weary sigh. Being a single mother had never been her plan. Michael, Jaden's father, had died before their son was born, a car accident that left her alone and 5 months pregnant. She'd persevered through nursing school with a newborn, built a career while raising her son, and somehow managed to give Jaden a childhood filled with love, if not material abundance. "Mom, do you think Grandma will like my drawings?" Jaden asked, pulling out his sketch pad. Tanya smiled, brushing a hand over his closely cropped hair. "She's going to love them, baby. Almost as much as she loves you." The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their imminent departure. As the engines roared to life, no one aboard Flight 2187 could have predicted how their lives would intersect in the hours ahead. 1 hour into the flight, the calm atmosphere of the first-class cabin shattered. It began with a small change, the sudden dimming of cabin lights as they passed through a bank of clouds. For most passengers, this minor adjustment warranted no reaction, but for 7-year-old Ethan Harrison, it triggered a cascade of sensory overload. First came the rocking, forward and back, increasingly vigorous. Then the humming escalated to a high-pitched keen that sliced through the ambient noise of the aircraft. Wesley Harrison recognized the signs immediately, his body tensing as he prepared for what was coming. "Ethan," he said softly, leaning close to his son. "Remember our breathing? Let's count together. 1. But Ethan was already beyond reach. The tablet slipped from his lap as his arms began to flail, his movements becoming more erratic with each second. Then came the scream, raw, primal, and piercing. Passengers startled in their seats. A woman in row 3 visibly flinched, closing her laptop and turning to stare. The businessman in 2D, Lawrence Brooks, CFO of a pharmaceutical company, lowered his Wall Street Journal with an expression of unconcealed disgust. "Ethan, buddy, it's okay," Wesley tried again, attempting to place a comforting hand on his son's shoulder, which only intensified the screaming. Ethan's face reddened with the effort, tears streaming down his cheeks as he kicked repeatedly against the seat in front. Alicia Davis appeared instantly, crouching in the aisle beside them. "Can I help, Mr. Harrison? Does he need anything?" His noise-canceling headphones, Wesley replied, struggling to keep his voice steady as he searched through Ethan's backpack. "And the weighted blanket in the overhead compartment." Keith Peterson arrived from economy, having heard the commotion. "Sir, you need to control your child," he stated flatly. "He's disturbing the other passengers." Wesley felt a flash of anger but suppressed it, focusing on finding the headphones. "He's autistic. He's having a sensory meltdown. I'm doing everything I can." Alicia shot Keith a warning glance before retrieving the weighted blanket. "It's all right, Mr. Harrison. Take your time." But Ethan's meltdown was escalating. He thrashed against the seat belt, his screams punctuated by gasping sobs. When Wesley attempted to place the headphones over his ears, Ethan knocked them away, sending them clattering down the aisle. "For God's sake," Lawrence Brooks exclaimed loudly from his seat, not bothering to lower his voice. "Can't you control that child? Some of us paid good money for a peaceful flight. Several passengers murmured in agreement. An elderly woman whispered something about parents these days, while a younger executive made a show of inserting expensive earbuds. Wesley felt his face burning with a combination of helplessness, embarrassment, and mounting frustration. Charlotte's accusations echoed in his mind, "You're never there for him. You don't know how to handle his needs. You care more about your precious company than your own son." Their last fight had been devastating. "You think throwing money at therapists and special schools absolves you of actually being a father," she had shouted. "Ethan needs patience and understanding, not your 10-minute bedtime appearances when you remember he exists." Now, trapped in a metal tube at 30,000 feet with his son spiraling and judging eyes upon him, Wesley felt the truth of her words like a physical blow. In economy class, the sounds of Ethan's distress carried clearly. Tanya Washington, dozing lightly after her overnight shift, awakened immediately. Her nurse's instincts kicked in before her eyes fully opened. "What's happening?" Jaden asked, looking up from his sketch. Tanya listened to the screams with professional assessment. "Sounds like a child in distress," she said quietly. "Possibly autistic, having a sensory overload episode." She worked with special needs children during her rotation in pediatrics and recognized the distinctive nature of the cries. Several rows ahead, she could see flight attendants rushing toward first class. Jaden's expression changed to one of concern. "Like Cooper at school?" Cooper Williams was Jaden's classmate, a brilliant, quiet boy with autism who occasionally experienced similar meltdowns. Despite their different backgrounds, Jaden and Cooper had formed an unlikely friendship, with Jaden's calm, accepting nature providing a buffer against playground bullies. The tension in the cabin increased as Ethan's screams continued unabated. The captain's voice came over the intercom, "This is your captain speaking. We're experiencing some disturbance in the cabin. I need all passengers to remain seated with seatbelts fastened while our crew addresses the situation." In first class, Wesley's attempts to comfort Ethan continued to fail. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he tried every technique their therapist had recommended: deep pressure, comfort items, verbal reassurances. Nothing worked. Lawrence Brooks stood up, looming over their seats. "If you can't handle this situation, perhaps you should have left the boy with a professional caretaker. Some of us have important meetings to prepare for." Wesley looked up, raw emotion in his eyes. "He's my son, not a problem to be handled. Please sit down. The captain is considering an emergency landing if this continues," Keith informed Wesley in a low voice that nonetheless carried to nearby passengers. "FAA regulations require us to maintain a safe, controlled cabin environment." The implications hit Wesley like a physical blow. An emergency landing because of Ethan would make headlines. Harrison Air Force's flight diversion would be splashed across tabloids and social media. More importantly, it would be another traumatic experience for his already struggling son. In economy, Tanya noticed her son's increasing agitation. "Mom," Jaden said, unbuckling his seatbelt. "I think I need to use the bathroom." "Now. Can't it wait?" Tanya asked, recognizing the determined look on her son's face. "Jaden, what are you thinking?" But Jaden was already moving, slipping past her into the aisle before she could stop him. "I'll be right back," he promised. Tanya watched with mounting concern as her 12-year-old son moved purposefully toward the front of the plane, straight into the heart of the commotion. Jaden Washington moved with quiet determination through the economy cabin, ignoring the flight attendant call button that had started blinking on multiple seats. The sounds of Ethan's distress guided him forward like a beacon. When Keith Peterson spotted him approaching the curtain dividing economy from first class, he stepped into the aisle with an outstretched hand. "Young man, you need to return to your seat immediately. We're experiencing a situation." "I need to use the bathroom," Jaden replied with a conviction beyond his 12 years. "It's an emergency." Keith's expression hardened. "Use the lavatory in economy. First-class facilities are for first-class passengers only." Jayden stood his ground, his worn sneakers planted firmly on the cabin floor. "The economy one is occupied. Please, sir. It's urgent." Before Keith could respond, Alicia appeared through the curtain, her face tense with concern. Seeing the standoff, she quickly assessed the situation. "It's fine, Keith. Let him through." She turned to Jayden with a tight smile. "Quickly, please." Jayden slipped past them, but instead of heading to the lavatory, he moved directly toward the source of the screaming. The first-class cabin looked like a different world, spacious leather seats, actual glassware on tray tables, and in the center of it all, a scene of heartbreaking chaos. Ethan Harrison was in full meltdown, his small body rigid with distress as he screamed and thrashed against his seatbelt. His father, a man Jayden vaguely recognized from magazine covers, looked utterly defeated, his expensive suit wrinkled and his face drawn with exhaustion. Without hesitation, Jayden approached them, ignoring the stares of nearby passengers and Keith's renewed protests behind him. "What do you think you're doing?" Keith hissed, reaching for Jayden's shoulder. Alicia intercepted him. "Wait," she whispered. "Let's see." Jayden knelt in the aisle beside Ethan's seat, making himself smaller and less threatening. He didn't touch the overwhelmed child or speak loudly. Instead, he began humming softly, a simple, repetitive melody. Wesley Harrison watched in confusion as this unknown boy in worn jeans and a faded t-shirt positioned himself at eye level with his son. His first instinct was to protect Ethan from this stranger, but something in the boy's demeanor made him hesitate. "Hi, Ethan," Jayden said when his humming had created a small bubble of calm. His voice was gentle but not patronizing. "My name's Jayden. Your spinner is really cool. Is it okay if I sit here for a minute?" Ethan's screaming didn't stop, but his rhythm faltered slightly, the first change in pattern since the meltdown began. "I have a friend named Cooper who gets overwhelmed sometimes too," Jayden continued conversationally, as if they were simply two kids chatting on a playground. "When things get too bright or loud or just too much, his brain feels like it's on fire. Is that how you feel right now?" Ethan's movements began to slow, his attention caught by this new presence who spoke as if he understood. Jayden reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, smooth stone, black with flecks of silver that caught the light. "This is my calm stone. My grandma gave it to me. Sometimes when I feel scared or mad, I rub it like this." He demonstrated, running his thumb across the stone's surface in a rhythmic pattern. To Wesley's astonishment, Ethan's gaze fixed on the stone, his screams reducing to whimpers. "Would you like to hold it?" Jayden offered, placing the stone on the edge of Ethan's tray table without forcing it on him. "It's cool and smooth. Sometimes it helps to have something to focus on." Slowly, as if approaching a wild animal, Ethan reached for the stone. His fingers closed around it, and he brought it close to his face, examining its surface. "That's it," Jayden encouraged. "Now try taking a deep breath in through your nose, like you're smelling a really good pizza." He demonstrated, filling his lungs dramatically. "Then blow out through your mouth like you're cooling off hot chocolate." Remarkably, Ethan mimicked the action, one shuddering breath in, one halting breath out. "Good job." Jayden smiled. "Let's do it again. In through your nose." He continued the breathing exercise, each repetition bringing Ethan further from the edge of crisis. The first-class cabin had fallen completely silent, passengers and crew alike transfixed by the scene unfolding before them. Wesley Harrison stared in disbelief as his son, who had been unreachable moments before, began to calm under the guidance of this unknown child. "That's how Cooper and I do it at school," Jayden explained to Ethan, who was now rocking gently rather than thrashing. "When things get too much, we go to our quiet corner and breathe together. Sometimes I draw pictures for him to look at. Do you like drawings?" Ethan nodded, a small movement, but the first direct response he'd shown to anyone since the meltdown began. Tanya Washington appeared then, having followed her son to first class. Her expression cycled rapidly from embarrassment to surprise as she took in the scene. "I'm so sorry," she began, addressing Wesley. "My son shouldn't have." "No," Wesley interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. "Please don't apologize. He's helping." The words seemed inadequate for the miracle he was witnessing. Alicia stood protectively near Jaden, effectively blocking Keith from intervening. The senior flight attendant's eyes were warm with approval as she watched the young boy continue his gentle intervention. "Sometimes when I'm drawing," Jaden was saying to Ethan, who was now completely focused on him, "I imagine I'm creating a whole new world where I make all the rules. Would you like to see one of my drawings?" Ethan nodded again, more definitely this time. "They're in my backpack." Jaden looked up at his mother. "Mom, could you maybe get my sketchbook? It's in the front pocket." Tanya hesitated, looking to Wesley for permission. "Please," Wesley said, "if it's not too much trouble." As Tanya turned to retrieve Jaden's backpack from economy, Lawrence Brooks made a dismissive sound from his seat. "Ridiculous. We're all being held hostage by a child's tantrum." Wesley turned to him, newfound confidence in his posture. "My son is not having a tantrum, sir. He's autistic and was experiencing sensory overload. This young man just accomplished what none of us sophisticated adults could do. He showed compassion and understanding." Lawrence Brooks fell silent, chastened by the murmurs of agreement from surrounding passengers. When Tanya returned with the sketchbook, Ethan had fully settled. His breathing was regular, his body relaxed in his seat. The weighted blanket that had been rejected earlier now lay comfortably across his lap, and the calm stone remained clutched in his small hand. Wesley Harrison looked at Jaden with something approaching awe. "Thank you," he said simply. "What's your name?" "Jaden Washington, sir." "Well, Jaden Washington," Wesley said, "you've just done something remarkable. Please, both of you," Wesley gestured to the empty first-class seats across the aisle. "Join us." Tanya Washington hesitated, keenly aware of her nurse's scrubs amid the business attire and designer clothes surrounding them. "That's very kind, but we should return to our seats." "I insist," Wesley said, his eyes sincere. "After what your son just did for Ethan, please." Keith Peterson stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Sir, I'm afraid that's against company policy. Economy passengers cannot be seated in first class without proper—" "I'll pay for the upgrade," Wesley interrupted without taking his eyes off Tanya and Jaden. "Full fare difference for both of them." Keith began another protest but was silenced by Alicia's firm hand on his arm. "I'll take care of the arrangements, Mr. Harrison," she said warmly. "Ms. Washington, please make yourselves comfortable. Can I bring you anything? Perhaps a hot chocolate for the young hero?" As Tanya and Jaden settled into the plush leather seats, the reactions from the other first-class passengers varied widely. An elderly couple smiled approvingly, while a middle-aged woman in designer clothes pursed her lips in disapproval. Lawrence Brooks made a show of requesting a different seat, which was politely denied due to the full flight. "Your son is incredible," Wesley said to Tanya once they were seated. Ethan had returned to his tablet, now calmly watching a video with headphones in place, occasionally glancing at Jaden with interest. "How did he know what to do?" Jaden answered before his mother could. "My friend Cooper at school is autistic. We sit together at lunch. Sometimes he gets overwhelmed like Ethan did, especially in the cafeteria when it's really loud." He shrugged as if his actions were entirely ordinary. "Our teacher taught us about breathing techniques and focusing exercises. Cooper taught me the rest." "Jaden has always had a special way with people," Tanya added, the pride evident in her voice despite her attempt at modesty. "He seems to understand what others need, sometimes before they know themselves. I work with special needs children sometimes at the hospital too," she continued. "South Chicago Memorial, Pediatric Ward. I've seen many children with sensory processing issues." Wesley nodded thoughtfully. "We've been through 4 different specialists with Ethan. Each one has their own approach, their own theories. But nothing's worked as well as. He gestured to where Ethan was now showing Jaden something on his tablet. The two boys huddled together in quiet conversation. Children often connect in ways adults can't understand, Tanya observed. They don't have our preconceptions or judgments. Or our social barriers, Wesley added meaningfully, the implied acknowledgement of their different worlds hanging in the air between them. Have you ever witnessed a moment where social barriers disappeared and true human connection emerged? Comment number 1 if you believe children naturally see past our artificial divides. Like this video if you've ever been touched by someone's unexpected kindness, and subscribe to hear more stories that challenge our assumptions about each other. Now, let's see what happens when these two families from different worlds continue their unexpected journey together. It hasn't been easy, Wesley confessed, loosening his tie as if also loosening the constraints of his usual reserve. My ex-wife Charlotte left 8 months ago. Said I didn't understand Ethan's needs, that I was too focused on the company to be the father he deserved. I'm sorry, Tanya said sincerely. Single parenting is a challenge under any circumstances. You're a single parent too? Wesley asked. Yes. Jaden's father died before he was born. Car accident. I'm sorry for your loss, Wesley said, the practiced phrase carrying genuine empathy. It was a long time ago, Tanya replied, though the shadow that crossed her face suggested the wound wasn't entirely healed. I've had 12 years to adjust to doing this alone. Meanwhile, Jaden had opened his sketchbook, showing Ethan his drawings. The pages revealed remarkable talent, detailed sketches of city scenes, fantasy creatures, and comic-style narratives. He draws these himself? Wesley asked, impressed by the skill evident in the artwork. Every day, Tanya nodded. It's how he processes the world. We can't afford art lessons, but he watches tutorials on the library computers. Ethan, typically reluctant to engage with strangers, seemed fascinated by Jaden's drawings. He pointed to a detailed dragon, making a soft sound of appreciation. You like dragons? Jaden asked. When Ethan nodded, Jaden turned to a fresh page. I can show you how to draw one. It's easy when you break it down into shapes. As Jaden began a step-by-step demonstration, Wesley observed his son's unusual focus and engagement. He rarely connects with other children like this. Or adults, for that matter. Jaden has that effect on people, Tanya said. His teachers say he's an old soul. What grade is he in? 7th, at Westside Public. It's not the best school in Chicago, but they have a good teacher-student ratio. Wesley nodded, noticing Jaden's worn sneakers and the carefully mended seam on his backpack. The contrast with Ethan's private school uniform and custom-made therapeutic tools was striking. And you work as a nurse? He asked. Yes, full-time at South Chicago Memorial, plus weekend shifts at a neighborhood clinic. This trip. She hesitated. My mother in LA was recently diagnosed with cancer. Early stage, but at her age. I wanted Jaden to have this time with her. Understanding dawned on Wesley's face. That's why you're flying. Tanya nodded. 6 months of saving. Worth every penny. The plane hit a patch of turbulence, causing drinks to slosh in their cups. Ethan immediately tensed, his hands flapping anxiously. It's okay, Jaden said calmly. It's just like a bumpy car ride. Here, hold on to your calm stone and let's count together. Ethan clutched the stone, his eyes fixed on Jaden as they counted slowly to 10. The moment of potential crisis passed without escalation. That's incredible, Wesley murmured to Tanya. Our therapist has been working with him on coping mechanisms for months with minimal success. Sometimes children just need the right guide, Tanya replied. Someone they can relate to. As the turbulence continued, Lawrence Brooks seized the opportunity to make another comment. Well, isn't this cozy, he said loudly enough for surrounding passengers to hear. I suppose now we're letting economy passengers up here whenever they want. What's next, turning first class into a playground? Wesley stiffened, but before he could respond, Tanya spoke. Sir, her voice was measured but firm, my son and I are here at Mr. Harrison's invitation. If our presence offends you, perhaps you could request noise-canceling headphones. Several passengers chuckled, and Lawrence retreated behind his newspaper with a scowl. You handle that well, Wesley observed. The prejudice. I've had practice, Tanya said simply. As a black nurse, I deal with patients who question my competence daily. As a black mother, I've had to teach Jaden how to navigate a world that often prejudges him. You develop strategies. Wesley nodded thoughtfully. I built Harrison Innovations from nothing, you know. Everyone assumes I was born wealthy, but my father was a mechanic in Ohio. I worked my way through college on scholarships and part-time jobs. Really? Tanya seemed surprised. The media portrays you differently. The media prefers simple narratives. Self-made tech billionaire makes better copy than guy who got lucky with the right idea at the right time and had the privilege of being able to take risks others couldn't. Their conversation deepened as the flight continued, touching on the challenges of single parenthood, career pressures, and the different worlds they inhabited despite living in the same country. Meanwhile, Ethan had begun to open up in ways Wesley had rarely seen. Watching his son interact with Jaden, pointing, nodding, even occasionally whispering words, was like witnessing a flower slowly unfurling its petals toward the sun. He usually speaks less than 20 words a day, Wesley explained softly to Tanya. He's said more in the past 30 minutes than he typically does in hours. Jaden has always connected with children others find difficult, Tanya replied. His kindergarten teacher once told me he had a gift for friendship. As Jaden showed Ethan a simple game involving drawing dots and connecting them to form shapes, Wesley noticed the boy's artistic talent again. Has Jaden ever had formal art training? Tanya shook her head. His school eliminated the art program 3 years ago due to budget cuts. He's mostly self-taught, with help from library books and online tutorials when we can access them. Wesley frowned. That's a shame. He clearly has remarkable talent. We make do, Tanya said without self-pity. The library has been our second home since he was little. As they talked, the artificial barriers that typically separated people of their different backgrounds seemed to dissolve. They were simply two parents navigating difficult circumstances, finding unexpected common ground at 30,000 feet. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking, the intercom crackled. We're expecting continued turbulence for the next 15 to 20 minutes. Flight attendants, please secure the cabin and take your seats. The aircraft lurched dramatically, causing drinks to spill and overhead bins to creak. Passengers gasped as the plane dropped suddenly before stabilizing. The "fasten seatbelt" signs pinged on throughout the cabin. Ethan's reaction was immediate. His body went rigid, eyes wide with fear as the tablet slipped from his hands. His breathing quickened as he clutched the armrests, the beginning signs of another meltdown brewing. Ethan, buddy, it's okay, Wesley began, reaching for his son's hand. But Jaden was already leaning across the aisle. Ethan, remember our breathing? Let's count like before. 1. He began the counting ritual they'd established earlier, his voice steady despite the rocking aircraft. Ethan's eyes locked onto Jaden's face, his panicked breathing gradually synchronizing with the older boy's calm counting. Even as the plane shuddered through another patch of rough air, Ethan remained focused on Jaden, who had begun describing an imaginary world where turbulence was just dragons playing beneath the clouds. They're friendly dragons, Jaden explained, sketching quickly on a fresh page of his notebook. They're just saying hello by bumping their backs against the plane. See how this one has a smile? He's trying to be gentle, but dragons are big, so even their gentle bumps feel strong to us. Ethan leaned forward, fascinated by the emerging dragon illustration, his anxiety visibly receding despite the continued physical turbulence. That's remarkable, Wesley whispered to Tanya. Usually turbulence triggers an immediate meltdown. As Alicia moved through the cabin checking seatbelts, Lawrence Brooks seized the opportunity to make his displeasure known once more. "This is precisely what I was talking about," he said loudly, gesturing toward Jaden and Tanya. "First class is becoming a circus. I paid extra specifically to avoid being around certain types of people." The racial undertone in his comment hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably, while others nodded in quiet agreement. Wesley Harrison straightened in his seat, his expression hardening. "Mr. Brooks, isn't it?" His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to boardroom confrontations. "Let me be clear, these are my guests, and they have shown more class in the past hour than you have demonstrated during this entire flight." Lawrence sputtered, his face reddening. "Now see here, Harrison." "No, you see here," Wesley continued calmly. "That certain type of people comment reveals far more about your character than it does about them. Ms. Washington is a medical professional who saves lives daily, and her son just helped mine when no one else could. What exactly have you contributed to this flight beyond complaints?" A smattering of applause broke out among the passengers. Lawrence retreated into fuming silence as the plane continued to bump through turbulent air. Tanya touched Wesley's arm lightly. "Thank you, but you didn't need to do that." "Actually, I did," Wesley replied. "For too long I've been silent when I should have spoken up. Part of my privilege has been the ability to ignore these moments." The conversation paused as another violent lurch rocked the plane. When they stabilized, Tanya continued in a quieter voice. "You'd be surprised how common those attitudes are. As a nurse, I deal with patients who request another nurse as soon as they see me, regardless of my qualifications. Last month, a doctor assumed I was janitorial staff despite my full uniform and credentials." Wesley listened intently, genuinely disturbed. "I knew discrimination existed, of course, but hearing your daily experiences." He shook his head. "It's different when you see it through someone else's eyes. That's why representation matters," Tanya said. "Jaden has never had a black male teacher. Not once in 7 years of school. How does that shape his view of what's possible for him?" Meanwhile, Jaden continued his storytelling, keeping Ethan engaged through the worst of the turbulence. His imaginary world had expanded to include friendly sky creatures that protected planes during storms. "Your son has quite the imagination," Wesley observed, watching the boys interact. "It's his escape," Tanya explained. "Our neighborhood isn't always safe for kids to play outside. Drawing and storytelling let him create worlds where he has control." Wesley nodded thoughtfully. "I built my first computer when I was 12. Technology was my escape from a difficult home situation. My father." He hesitated, rarely discussing his past. "He had certain expectations about masculinity that I couldn't meet. Building things gave me a space where I made the rules." "So you weren't always the powerful CEO," Tanya smiled. "There was a time when you were just a kid with dreams." "Sometimes I miss that kid," Wesley admitted. "Success brings its own complications. The higher you climb, the more isolated you become. Charlotte used to say I built emotional firewalls the same way I built security software." The plane stabilized as they moved beyond the storm system. Ethan remained calm, now showing Jaden his favorite game on the tablet. The two boys huddled together in a world of their own making. "He's never connected with another child like this," Wesley said, the wonder evident in his voice. "We've tried countless playdates, social skills groups, specialized activities. Nothing's worked until today." Alicia returned to check on them once the seatbelt sign turned off. "Everything okay here? Can I refresh any drinks?" As she served fresh beverages, Wesley noticed Jaden watching Ethan play the tablet game with intense focus. The younger boy occasionally guided Jaden's hand, showing him special features, a rare moment of Ethan initiating interaction. "He's teaching me," Jaden explained when he caught Wesley watching. "Ethan knows all the secret levels. May I see your drawings again?" Wesley asked, genuinely interested in Jaden's artwork. Jaden nodded, passing over his sketchbook. Wesley flipped through the pages with growing appreciation. The drawings revealed remarkable talent, detailed cityscapes of Chicago, character studies that captured subtle emotions, and elaborate fantasy worlds rendered with technical skill beyond the boy's years. "These are extraordinary," Wesley said, pausing at a particularly detailed sketch of an urban street corner. "Is this your neighborhood?" "Yes, sir. That's the view from our apartment window. I like drawing what I see and then imagining how it could be different." He pointed to another page showing the same scene transformed into a futuristic landscape with gardens and soaring architecture. "You have a gift," Wesley said seriously. "Have you ever thought about digital art? With your talent, you could excel in concept design or animation." Jaden's eyes lit up. "I've watched videos about digital drawing, but we don't have a computer at home. Sometimes I get to use the tablets at the library, but there's always a time limit." Wesley glanced at Tanya, who gave a small shrug that communicated volumes about financial realities. "What about your school? Do they have an art program?" "They cut it 3 years ago," Jaden replied matter-of-factly. "Budget issues. My teacher lets me draw during lunch sometimes, though." Wesley frowned, about to respond when Ethan unexpectedly spoke up. "Show him the dragon story," Ethan said clearly, a complete sentence that caused Wesley's eyes to widen in surprise. Jaden turned to a series of pages that told a visual story about a misunderstood dragon who learned to use his fire for helping rather than hurting. The narrative was sophisticated, the artwork impressive. "You created this entire story yourself?" Wesley asked. Jaden nodded. "I want to make graphic novels someday. Or maybe work for a game company designing characters." Wesley pulled out his phone. "Ethan, would you like to take a picture with your new friend?" Normally averse to photos, Ethan nodded enthusiastically, scooting closer to Jaden. Wesley captured the image of the two boys side by side, Ethan actually smiling, a rare and precious sight. As he lowered the phone, Wesley noticed something in the photo that made him pause. He zoomed in on Jaden's hand, which was visible holding the sketchbook. There, on the boy's wrist, was a distinctive birthmark, a small, irregular patch of darker skin shaped somewhat like a crescent moon. Something about that mark triggered a distant memory, causing Wesley to look more closely at Jaden's features. The shape of his eyes, the curve of his jaw, certain expressions as he spoke, they sparked a disturbing sense of familiarity. "Ms. Washington," Wesley said carefully, "if you don't mind my asking, you mentioned Jaden's father passed away before he was born?" Tanya nodded, a flicker of old pain crossing her face. "Yes. Michael Washington. He was a software engineer. Brilliant man." Wesley felt his heart rate accelerate. "Michael Washington, from San Francisco?" Tanya's eyes widened in surprise. "Yes, he was working for a tech startup there about 13 years ago." "How did you know that?" The blood drained from Wesley's face as pieces of a puzzle he'd long buried began to align with terrible clarity. "Mr. Harrison? Are you okay?" Tanya asked, concerned by his sudden pallor. I think I knew Michael," Wesley said, his voice barely audible over the aircraft's engines. "If it's the same Michael Washington I'm thinking of, he worked on a project with me. Before Harrison Innovations became successful." Tanya leaned forward, eager for any connection to her late husband. "Really? That's amazing. What a small world. Michael never mentioned your name, but he talked about various projects. What did you work on together?" Wesley couldn't meet her eyes. "A security protocol. Early encryption technology." He swallowed hard. "Excuse me for a moment. I need to use the lavatory." As Wesley made his way to the bathroom on unsteady legs, the full impact of what he suspected threatened to overwhelm him. If Jaden was Michael Washington's son, the same Michael Washington, then this chance encounter wasn't just unlikely. It was potentially devastating. Because 13 years ago, Wesley Harrison had done something unforgivable. Something that had changed the course of multiple lives. Something that, if revealed, could destroy everything he'd built. And now, the consequences of that action were sitting across the aisle from him, innocently drawing dragons with his son. Wesley Harrison gripped the edges of the small airplane sink, staring at his reflection in the lavatory mirror. The distinguished CEO looking back at him seemed like a stranger, a carefully constructed facade hiding truths he'd spent years burying. The photograph on his phone seemed to burn in his pocket. Jaden and Ethan, smiling together. But it was Jaden's birthmark that had triggered the avalanche of memories and guilt. Michael Washington had the same distinctive crescent-shaped mark on his wrist. Wesley splashed cold water on his face, trying to steady his breathing. 13 years ago, he and Michael had been partners in a small startup developing revolutionary encryption software. Young, brilliant, and hungry for success, they'd worked 80-hour weeks in a cramped San Francisco apartment that served as both living quarters and office space. Michael had been the coding genius, the visionary who created the core algorithm that would eventually become the foundation of Harrison Security Systems, now the flagship product of Harrison Innovations and the source of Wesley's billions. Taking a deep breath, Wesley returned to his seat, where Ethan was still happily engaged with Jaden. Tanya looked up with a warm smile that felt like knives in his chest. "Feeling better?" she asked. "Yes, thank you," Wesley lied, forcing a smile. "Flying sometimes affects me." He turned to the boys, seeking distraction from his tumultuous thoughts. "What are you two working on now?" Ethan looked up with unusual animation. "Jaden's teaching me to draw a superhero. Look." He held up a page where he'd sketched a wobbly but recognizable caped figure. "That's excellent, Ethan." Wesley's surprise was genuine. His son rarely showed interest in drawing or creating, despite numerous art therapists' attempts. "Can I see the photo you took of us?" Ethan asked, another rare occurrence of him initiating communication. Of course, Wesley pulled out his phone, opening the image gallery. As Ethan and Jaden huddled over the screen, Wesley found himself studying Jaden's profile more carefully. The resemblance to Michael was subtle but unmistakable, especially around the eyes and the determined set of the jaw. "You said you knew Jaden's father?" Tanya asked quietly while the boys were distracted. Wesley nodded, throat tight. "I think so. Michael Washington, tall, with glasses. Brilliant coder with a distinctive laugh." Tanya's eyes widened. "That's him. You really did know Michael." Her expression softened with nostalgic sorrow. "He used to laugh like he was surprised by his own joy. I've never heard anyone else laugh quite like that." The memory twisted in Wesley's gut. Michael's laugh had been distinctive, a sudden burst of genuine delight that typically followed solving a particularly challenging coding problem. "How did you meet him?" Wesley asked, knowing he was walking a dangerous path but unable to stop himself. "At a coffee shop near the tech company where he worked. I was in nursing school, studying for finals. He kept coming back day after day, always sitting at the table near mine. Finally asked me out after 2 weeks of what he thought was subtle glancing." She smiled at the memory. "We were together for almost a year before." "Before what happened?" Wesley prompted gently when she paused. Tanya's expression darkened. "Before he was accused of stealing proprietary code from his company. He was fired, blacklisted in the industry. He always maintained his innocence, but no one would hire him. We were planning to move back to Chicago, start over." Her voice faltered. "The accident happened 3 days before our planned move. Brake failure on a steep hill in San Francisco. Wesley felt physically ill. The timeline matched exactly. After Michael's accident, Wesley had acquired full rights to their joint project, rewritten enough of the code to claim it as his own, and launched the company that would make him a billionaire. "I'm so sorry," he managed to say, the words hollow in his ears. "It was a long time ago," Tanya said. Jaden has been my focus ever since. It hasn't been easy, but we've managed. Managed seemed an understatement for raising a child alone while working multiple nursing jobs. A child who should have been heir to a technology fortune. A child who should have had every opportunity, instead of hoping for time on a library computer. A child Wesley had effectively robbed. Jaden looks like him, Wesley observed, unable to help himself. Yes, Tanya smiled. Same artistic talent too. Michael used to sketch user interfaces by hand before coding them. Said it helped him visualize the user experience better than any software tool. Wesley remembered those sketches, meticulous, intuitive designs that had influenced his own thinking about how security software should function. Another debt unpaid. Mom, can I show Ethan my comic about the space explorer? Jaden asked, interrupting Wesley's spiral of guilt. Of course, honey. It's in the side pocket of your backpack. As Jaden retrieved his comic, Wesley noticed Lawrence Brooks watching them with narrowed eyes from across the aisle. The businessman had been silent since their earlier confrontation, but his attention seemed unusually focused now. Jaden spread out several pages of a hand-drawn comic featuring an astronaut exploring alien worlds. Ethan was entranced, pointing at details and asking questions, more engaged than Wesley had seen him with any therapist or specialist. This is really good, Wesley said, examining the comic's sophisticated layout and storytelling. How long have you been creating these? Since I was 8, Jaden replied. I make a new issue every month. This is issue 48. 48 issues? That's impressive commitment for someone your age. Jaden shrugged. I like seeing how the character grows and changes. Each planet teaches him something new. Wesley was struck by the maturity of the concept. This wasn't just a child's hobby, this was genuine artistic talent coupled with narrative sophistication. Talent that might never reach its full potential due to lack of resources and opportunities. Talent that might never have been constrained if Wesley had made different choices 13 years ago. Mr. Harrison, Lawrence Brooks's voice cut through Wesley's thoughts. The businessman had moved to stand in the aisle beside their row. I thought I recognized the name Michael Washington when I overheard your conversation. Wasn't he involved in that coding scandal at TechFusion years ago? Wesley tensed. Lawrence Brooks was roughly his age and moved in similar business circles. It wasn't impossible that he remembered the incident. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Wesley replied carefully. Oh, I think you do, Lawrence said with the satisfied smile of someone who believed they held valuable leverage. Security algorithm theft, wasn't it? Around 2012. Quite the scandal in Bay Area tech circles at the time. Tanya straightened in her seat. My husband was falsely accused. He never stole anything. Lawrence raised an eyebrow. Interesting. Because the company that accused him was Parallel Systems, which later became. He paused dramatically, Harrison Innovations. Your company, Mr. Harrison. The cabin seemed to go silent around them, though the aircraft engines continued their steady roar. Wesley felt trapped, cornered by his own past in the confined space of the airplane cabin. Tanya turned to Wesley, confusion giving way to suspicion. Is that true? You were with Parallel Systems? I was a junior partner, Wesley admitted, his mouth dry. It was before I founded Harrison Innovations. So you were there when Michael was accused? Tanya's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. You were part of the company that destroyed his reputation. That left him unemployable. That indirectly caused his death. The boys had stopped their drawing, aware of the tension suddenly crackling between the adults. Ethan shrank back in his seat, sensing conflict. It's more complicated than that, Wesley began, but Lawrence interrupted. Actually, it might be simpler than anyone realized, he said with malicious pleasure. The encryption protocol that made Harrison Innovations famous bears striking similarities to what Washington was reportedly working on before his termination. Industry rumors suggested the theft accusation might have been a cover for something else. "Brooks, this isn't the time or place," Wesley warned, glancing meaningfully at the children. But Lawrence pressed on, enjoying Wesley's discomfort. "I always wondered how you pivoted so quickly from near bankruptcy to industry domination. Quite the meteoric rise after Washington's unfortunate accident." The way he emphasized accident made its implication clear. Tanya looked between the two men, her expression hardening as she processed the implications. "Mr. Harrison, what exactly was your relationship with my husband?" Wesley knew he stood at a crossroads. He could continue the lies that had built his empire, or he could finally acknowledge the truth that had haunted him for 13 years. Looking at Jaden, this remarkable boy who should have been his partner's legacy, and at his own son, who had connected with Jaden in a way he'd never connected with anyone else, Wesley made his choice. "We were partners," he said quietly. "Michael Washington was my business partner and friend. And I betrayed him." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with 13 years of guilt and deception. Wesley Harrison, billionaire CEO, had just admitted his darkest secret at 30,000 feet, surrounded by strangers and faced with the widow and child of the man he'd wronged. "I need to use the restroom," Wesley said abruptly, unable to bear the shock and confusion blooming on Tanya's face. "Ethan, stay with Alicia for a moment." He signaled the flight attendant, who approached with concern. "Everything all right, Mr. Harrison?" "Please watch Ethan for a few minutes," he requested, then to Tanya, "Would you join me? There are things you deserve to hear privately." Tanya hesitated, glancing at Jaden who was watching the adults with growing anxiety. "It's okay, Mom," the boy said with maturity beyond his years. "I'll stay with Ethan." Alicia guided them to a small crew area near the galley where they could speak with some privacy. Wesley paced the confined space for a moment, gathering courage, before facing Tanya directly. "Michael didn't steal any code," he began, the confession tumbling out after years of suppression. "I took his work and framed him for theft." Tanya's sharp intake of breath cut through the ambient noise of the aircraft. "What?" "We were partners in a small startup. Two guys with big dreams and empty bank accounts," Wesley continued, unable to meet her eyes. "Michael created an encryption algorithm that was years ahead of anything on the market. Revolutionary. We were going to change the world together." He leaned against the wall, the weight of his past pressing down on him. "Then an investor approached me privately. Said he'd fund a new company with me as CEO if I had sole ownership of the intellectual property. Offered $10 million in startup capital." "So you stole it?" Tanya's voice was flat, her hands clenched at her sides. Wesley nodded, shame burning through him. "I modified enough of the code to make it look different, claimed Michael had stolen my work rather than the other way around. Used the investor's connections to blacklist him in the industry. I told myself it was just business. That he'd find another job, create something new. That one algorithm wasn't worth passing up the opportunity of a lifetime. That opportunity cost my husband his life," Tanya said, her voice shaking with fury and grief. "Cost my son his father. Cost us everything." "I know," Wesley whispered. "When I heard about the accident, I told myself it was a coincidence. That I wasn't responsible. But I've carried it ever since." Tanya's eyes flashed. "Carried it? You built $1 billion empire on stolen work while I picked up extra hospital shifts to afford Jaden's school supplies." "I didn't know Michael had a family," Wesley said, though he recognized the hollowness of this defense as soon as he spoke it. "We weren't close outside of work. He never mentioned being married or expecting a child. We'd only been married a few months. The pregnancy was new. Michael was private about his personal life." Tanya crossed her arms. "Not that it would have mattered to you, would it? You saw a chance for wealth and took it, regardless of who got hurt." Wesley had no response. She was right. After the accident, Tanya continued, "I tried to claim life insurance, but the policy had a clause excluding coverage if the deceased was under investigation for criminal activity. Your accusation cost us even that small security. I was 7 months pregnant, alone, with nothing. The enormity of what he'd done hit Wesley with fresh force. His actions hadn't just derailed a career, they'd devastated lives. Lives that continued to struggle while he accumulated more wealth than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. I can't change what happened, Wesley said finally. But I can try to make it right. Tanya laughed bitterly. Make it right? How exactly do you plan to do that? Can you bring Michael back? Can you give Jaden the years he should have had with his father? No, Wesley admitted. But I can acknowledge the truth. Publicly. I can make sure you and Jaden receive what should have been yours all along. Michael's contribution was worth billions, not millions. I can establish a trust for Jaden's education. Create a foundation in Michael's name. You think money fixes this? Tanya's voice rose sharply before she controlled it, aware of nearby passengers. No, Wesley said quietly. Nothing fixes this. But it's a start. And it's better than continuing the lie. They stood in tense silence, the aircraft's vibrations thrumming through the floor beneath them. Finally, Tanya spoke, her voice controlled but cold. I need to process this. And I need to get back to my son. As they returned to their seats, Wesley noticed Lawrence Brooks watching with undisguised interest. The businessman clearly sensed scandal and opportunity in equal measure. Ethan looked up as they approached, his face brightening at his father's return. Dad! Jaden showed me how to draw a robot. Look! He proudly held up a crude but recognizable drawing. The innocent enthusiasm pierced Wesley's heart. Here was his son, finally connecting with another child, finding joy in creativity, all because of Jaden Washington, the boy whose life Wesley had inadvertently derailed before it even began. Jaden studied the adults' faces with perceptive eyes. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, honey, Tanya said with forced lightness. Mr. Harrison and I were just talking about some grown-up things. Jaden's expression made it clear he didn't believe this, but he returned his attention to Ethan, guiding the younger boy's hand as they continued their drawing. Wesley sank into his seat, watching the two boys interact. Ethan was speaking more words, showing more animation than he typically did all day. The contrast between his son's newfound happiness and his own crushing guilt created a cognitive dissonance almost too painful to bear. He has Michael's talent, Wesley observed quietly to Tanya. Not just artistic skill, but the ability to connect with people. To understand what they need. Tanya didn't respond immediately, her expression guarded as she watched the boys. Finally, she said, Michael believed in doing the right thing, even when it was difficult. He taught me that integrity matters more than success. The implication of her words hung between them. Lawrence Brooks chose that moment to approach again, sliding into the empty seat beside Wesley. Fascinating conversation earlier, he said in a low voice. I'd love to discuss potential business implications over drinks sometime. Wesley turned to him with cold fury. Are you attempting to blackmail me, Brooks? Blackmail? No, Lawrence smiled thinly. Just recognizing a potential opportunity for mutual benefit. Information like this could affect stock prices significantly if it became public. My investment firm might be interested in getting ahead of such market fluctuations. Before Wesley could respond, Tanya leaned across the aisle. Mr. Brooks, is that your business card I see in your pocket? I'd like to have it. Surprised, Lawrence handed it over. Of course. Always happy to connect with potential clients. Tanya studied the card before tucking it into her purse. Thank you. I may need to contact you later as a witness to this conversation. Lawrence's smug expression faltered. Witness? Yes, Tanya said calmly. When I speak with my attorney about Mr. Harrison's confession and your apparent attempt to profit from it. Lawrence retreated to his original seat without another word, his expression clouded. As the plane began its initial descent into Los Angeles, Alicia announced that passengers should prepare for landing. The boys reluctantly packed away their drawing materials, Ethan holding tightly to the pictures Jaden had given him. "Will you be my friend?" Ethan asked Jaden directly, a complete sentence directed at another child, something Wesley had never witnessed before. "Sure," Jaden replied easily. "Maybe we can draw together again sometime." Wesley looked at Tanya, the question unspoken between them. Would there be any connection between their families after today? Or had his confession destroyed even that possibility? Tanya's expression revealed nothing as she helped Jaden gather his belongings. The choice that had seemed so simple 13 years ago, success at any cost, now revealed its true complexity. As the plane descended toward Los Angeles, Wesley Harrison faced the consequences of his past with no idea what the future might hold. The seatbelt sign illuminated as Flight 2187 began its final approach to Los Angeles International Airport. The cabin crew moved efficiently through the aisles, checking that tray tables were stowed and seats were upright. For most passengers, it was the routine end to a cross-country journey. For Wesley Harrison and Tanya Washington, it was the culmination of a life-altering revelation. "I need to understand something," Tanya said suddenly, her voice low enough that the boys couldn't hear. "All these years, you've lived with this. Built your company, your reputation, your fortune, all of it knowing it was founded on a lie. How did you justify it to yourself?" Wesley looked at her directly, refusing to hide behind any more deception. "At first, it was easy. I told myself Michael would bounce back. That he was talented enough to create something new, something better. Then after the accident." He paused, swallowing hard. "I convinced myself it was a tragic coincidence. That I wasn't responsible for what happened on that San Francisco hill. And later?" Tanya pressed. "When Harrison Innovations became a billion-dollar company? When you saw your face on magazine covers praising your genius?" By then, the lie was too big to confess, Wesley admitted. Too many people depended on the company, employees, shareholders, clients trusting our security systems. Exposing the truth would have hurt thousands of innocent people. So you protected them by continuing to hurt us, Tanya's voice hardened. "Do you know what it's been like? Raising a gifted child without resources to nurture his talents. Working 18-hour shifts while wondering if the apartment is safe enough to leave him alone. Choosing between paying for art supplies or new shoes." Each question landed like a physical blow. Wesley had no defense. "The worst part," Tanya continued, her control slipping, "is that Michael died believing his reputation was destroyed. That his work was worthless. That he'd failed me and our unborn child. You stole more than code, Mr. Harrison. You stole his dignity. His legacy." Jaden looked up sharply, having caught fragments of the conversation despite Tanya's attempts to keep her voice down. "Mom. What's going on? What about Dad?" Wesley saw the moment when understanding dawned in the boy's intelligent eyes, the realization that this wealthy stranger had some connection to his father's death. It was like watching a light dim, innocence giving way to painful adult knowledge. "You hurt my dad?" Jaden asked Wesley directly, his young voice steady despite the emotion behind the question. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Even Ethan sensed the tension, shrinking back in his seat and reaching for his comfort items. Wesley could have deflected, could have asked Tanya to explain later in private. Instead, he chose honesty, perhaps the first truly honest moment of his adult life. "Yes," he said simply. "I did something terrible to your father a long time ago. Something that hurt him, and ultimately hurt you and your mother. I can't undo it, but I want to try to make it right." Jaden's expression hardened in a way no 12-year-old should. "You can't make it right. I never even got to meet him." The raw pain in those words cut deeper than any adult accusation could have. Wesley's carefully constructed world of justifications and rationalizations crumbled completely. Ethan, distressed by the emotional currents swirling around him, began to rock and make distressed sounds. The sensory overload of the descent combined with the tension between his new friend and his father threatened another meltdown. Remarkably, despite his own turmoil, Jaden turned his attention to Ethan. "Hey, it's okay," he said softly. "Remember our breathing? We can count together." Wesley watched in awe as Jaden set aside his own pain to comfort Ethan, demonstrating a compassion and maturity that shamed him thoroughly. "He's an extraordinary child," Wesley said to Tanya. "You've raised him to be better than I could ever hope to be." "I raised him with Michael's values," Tanya replied. "Integrity. Compassion. Things you sacrificed for success." The plane touched down with a slight bump, the engines reversing thrust as they decelerated down the runway. The captain's voice announced their arrival at LAX, thanking passengers for choosing the airline. Routine words that felt surreal against the backdrop of their situation. As passengers began gathering belongings and preparing to deplane, Lawrence Brooks appeared beside their row once more. "My offer still stands, Harrison," he said quietly. "This little revelation could be managed with proper incentives. My silence has value." Before Wesley could respond, Tanya stood, facing Lawrence directly. "Mr. Brooks, if you attempt to profit from this situation in any way, I will personally ensure that every detail becomes public record through legal proceedings. You won't be ahead of the market, you'll be named as an accessory after the fact." Lawrence blanched slightly but maintained his composure. "You have no proof of anything. It would be your word against his." "Actually," Tanya removed her phone from her purse, "I recorded our conversation in the galley. California is a two-party consent state for recordings, but federal regulations apply in aircraft, and they permit single-party consent. I consented to record myself." Wesley wasn't certain if she was bluffing, but Lawrence clearly wasn't willing to take the chance. He retreated without another word, merging into the line of deplaning passengers. "Did you really record our conversation?" Wesley asked quietly. "Does it matter?" Tanya countered. "You've already confessed." As first-class passengers were invited to deplane, Wesley faced a decision. The easy path would be to walk away, offer financial compensation through lawyers, protect his public image, minimize the damage to Harrison Innovations. It was the logical choice, the business choice. Instead, he turned to Tanya and Jaden. "Before you go, I need to say something. Not just to you, but to everyone." Without waiting for her response, Wesley stood and addressed the first-class cabin. "Excuse me. May I have your attention for a moment?" Passengers paused in their preparations to leave, curious at this unusual request from a recognizable public figure. 13 years ago, I stole an encryption algorithm from my business partner, Michael Washington, Wesley announced clearly. I framed him for intellectual theft, destroyed his reputation, and built Harrison Innovations on his work. When he died in a car accident shortly thereafter, I remained silent and continued to profit from his genius. A shocked murmur ran through the cabin. Flight attendants exchanged uncertain glances, unsure whether to intervene. Michael Washington left behind a pregnant wife who has struggled alone for 12 years, Wesley continued, gesturing to Tanya and Jaden. While I became a billionaire, they've lived paycheck to paycheck. This ends today. He turned to face Tanya directly. Ms. Washington, I can't bring Michael back. I can't give Jaden the years he should have had with his father. But I can acknowledge the truth publicly and ensure that you receive proper recognition and compensation for Michael's contribution to what became Harrison Innovations. Tanya stood frozen, clearly unprepared for this public declaration. I'm prepared to transfer 20% ownership of Harrison Innovations to you, Wesley continued. That represents Michael's rightful stake in the company, with 13 years of growth. I'll also establish a foundation in Michael's name to support young coders from underprivileged backgrounds, with you as chairperson if you're willing. Whispers rippled through the cabin as passengers processed this extraordinary scene. Several had phones out, undoubtedly recording the moment that would soon go viral across social media. "Why are you doing this?" Tanya asked, her voice steady despite the emotion visible in her eyes. "Why not handle it privately, through lawyers?" "Because I'm tired of living with secrets," Wesley replied simply. "And because your son taught my son something I never could, how to connect with others. That's worth more than any company." Ethan, who had been watching the exchange with unusual focus, suddenly spoke up. "Is Jaden still going to be my friend? Even though you did a bad thing to his dad?" The innocent question cut through the tension like a knife. Every adult in hearing range fell silent, waiting for the answer. Jaden looked at Ethan, then at Wesley, and finally at his mother. Years of wondering about the father he'd never known, years of watching his mother struggle, years of limited opportunities despite his obvious talents, all of it hung in the balance of this moment. "I don't know, Ethan," Jaden answered honestly. "I need time to think about it." As they began to move toward the exit, Wesley made one final request. "Ms. Washington, would you and Jaden join us for dinner tonight? There's more I need to explain, and I believe Ethan would benefit from spending more time with Jaden, if you're willing." Tanya hesitated, clearly torn between anger at Wesley and awareness of the unusual connection between the boys. "I'll consider it," she said finally. "You have my number from the passenger manifest. Text me the details, and I'll let you know." As they deplaned into the bright California sunshine, nothing was resolved, but everything had changed. The truth, hidden for 13 years, had finally emerged into the light, with consequences none of them could fully predict. 6 months later, the headquarters of Harrison Innovations gleamed in the morning sunlight, its sleek glass and steel exterior reflecting the San Francisco skyline. Inside, on the 38th floor, the newly established Washington Foundation occupied an entire wing, its entrance dominated by a portrait of Michael Washington and the algorithm that had changed the tech industry. Tanya Washington, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that contrasted sharply with the nurse's scrubs she'd worn for over a decade, moved confidently through the open workspace. Employees nodded respectfully as she passed, many still adjusting to the Foundation's executive director who had dramatically entered their corporate world through what the media called the Flight 2187 confession. She paused at the door to the main conference room, where the quarterly board meeting was about to begin. Taking a deep breath, she entered the space where, just 6 months earlier, she would have been serving coffee rather than directing million-dollar initiatives. "Tanya." Perfect timing, Wesley Harrison greeted her, rising from his seat at the head of the table. His appearance had subtly changed since their fateful meeting, fewer designer suits, more casual attire, as if shedding some of the artifice that had defined his public persona. "Sorry I'm late," Tanya replied, taking her place at the table. The college tour with Jaden ran longer than expected. "How did he like Stanford's digital arts program?" Wesley asked. "Loved it," Tanya smiled genuinely. "Though he's still considering RSD and CalArts. The scholarship offers are overwhelming him with options." The board meeting proceeded efficiently, covering the Foundation's initiatives for supporting underrepresented groups in technology. Particular focus was placed on the Michael Washington Scholarship Program, which had already identified 50 promising young coders from economically disadvantaged backgrounds for full university sponsorship. "The coding boot camp in South Chicago has exceeded all expectations," Tanya reported, displaying statistics on the wall screen. 87% completion rate, with 62% of graduates already placed in tech jobs or internships. Wesley nodded approvingly. "Any updates on the mentorship program?" "We've paired all 50 scholarship recipients with industry professionals," Tanya confirmed. "Including 5 senior developers from Harrison Innovations who volunteered their time." The transition hadn't been easy. After Wesley's public confession on Flight 2187, Harrison Innovations stock had plummeted. Shareholders demanded his resignation. Tech blogs predicted the company's imminent collapse. But then something unexpected happened. Public opinion began to shift. The story of a tech billionaire owning his mistakes, making genuine amends, and giving proper credit to a wronged black engineer resonated in an industry plagued by similar ethics scandals. Competitors who initially circled like vultures found themselves facing uncomfortable questions about their own founding stories and intellectual property claims. When the meeting concluded, Tanya remained behind as other board members filed out. There was still a guardedness in her demeanor around Wesley, the wound too deep for complete healing, but the open hostility had faded over the months of working together. Ethan's therapist called yesterday, she mentioned casually. She says his progress has been remarkable. Attributes much of it to his weekly sessions with Jaden. Wesley's expression softened at the mention of his son. The art therapy was your idea. I can't thank you enough for suggesting it. Initially after the flight, Tanya had refused any personal connection with Wesley beyond the legal requirements of their settlement. But when Ethan began regressing without Jaden's calming presence, she'd reluctantly agreed to weekly meetups between the boys, supervised art sessions where Jaden taught Ethan drawing techniques. It benefits Jaden too, Tanya acknowledged. Teaching Ethan forces him to verbalize his creative process. His art teachers say it's improving his own work. Wesley checked his watch. We should head downstairs. The exhibition opens in 20 minutes. Together they took the elevator to the ground floor where Harrison Innovation's spacious lobby had been transformed into an art gallery. A banner across the entrance proclaimed, Different Perspectives, a collaborative exhibition by Jaden Washington and Ethan Harrison. Dozens of people already mingled in the space, corporate executives, art critics, and students from Jaden's former school in South Chicago, flown in specifically for this event. The center wall featured a spectacular mural, a collaborative work showing two boys of different races creating a bridge between separate worlds that gradually merged into one vibrant community. Near the refreshment table, Jaden held court with several tech journalists, articulate and poised in a new suit that fit his growing frame perfectly. At 13, he already showed the charisma and intelligence that would likely define his future. Nearby, Ethan arranged and rearranged a display of his drawings with intense focus, less comfortable with the crowd but visibly proud of his work. They're quite the pair, observed a familiar voice. Lawrence Brooks approached, looking considerably humbled compared to their last encounter. The fallout from Flight 2187 had touched him too. His attempt to profit from the situation had been mentioned in several news articles, damaging his reputation in financial circles. Mr. Brooks, Wesley acknowledged coolly. I'm surprised to see you here. I came to offer congratulations, Brooks said, uncharacteristically subdued. And perhaps to learn something. The Foundation's work is impressive. Before Wesley could respond, Jaden spotted them and waved enthusiastically. Mom! Mr. Harrison. The Times reporter wants a photo of all four of us by the mural. As they moved toward the boys, Tanya spoke quietly to Wesley. I've been meaning to tell you. Jaden asked about changing his middle name. Wesley raised an eyebrow. Oh. He wants to use Michael. Jaden Michael Washington. He says it helps him feel connected to his father. Wesley nodded, emotion briefly tightening his throat. It's a good name. The four of them gathered before the mural, Tanya and Jaden, Wesley and Ethan, two families forever connected by tragedy and redemption, their futures intertwined in ways none could have imagined on that fateful flight. On 3, everyone say, perspective, the photographer instructed. As the camera flashed, capturing the moment for posterity, Wesley reflected on how a single act of honesty had cascaded into transformation. He'd lost his company's majority ownership, suffered public humiliation, and faced legal consequences, yet somehow gained something far more valuable, a chance at redemption, a son who was finally thriving, and perhaps, eventually, forgiveness. Later, as guests admired the artwork and enjoyed refreshments, Ethan tugged at his father's sleeve. Dad, can Jaden sleep over this weekend? He's going to teach me shading techniques. If it's okay with Ms. Washington, Wesley replied, looking to Tanya with the question in his eyes. She hesitated only briefly before nodding. I think that would be fine. I have a foundation meeting on Saturday anyway. As the boys hurried off to discuss their plans, Wesley and Tanya found themselves momentarily alone amid the crowded gallery. I still haven't forgiven you completely, Tanya said quietly. I'm not sure I ever will. I understand, Wesley replied. I don't expect forgiveness. Just the opportunity to keep making amends. Tanya nodded thoughtfully. Michael used to say that true character isn't about avoiding mistakes, it's about how you respond when you've made them. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. He would have appreciated what you've done these past 6 months. Coming from her, it was perhaps the highest praise he could receive. As they rejoined the celebration of their son's artistic collaboration, Wesley Harrison understood that some debts could never be fully repaid, but acknowledging them was the first step toward healing. This story reminds us that beneath our surface differences, race, wealth, ability, lies our shared humanity. When Jaden reached out to Ethan on that flight, he demonstrated how compassion transcends social barriers. His simple act of kindness not only helped a child in distress but ultimately uncovered a long-buried injustice and changed multiple lives forever. We see how privilege can blind us to others' struggles. Wesley's wealth isolated him from understanding the consequences of his actions, while Tanya faced daily discrimination despite her skills and dedication. Yet the story also shows that redemption is possible when we confront our mistakes with honesty and commitment to change. Ethan and Jaden teach us about connection in its purest form. Despite different backgrounds and abilities, they formed a bond based on understanding and acceptance, something the adults around them struggled to achieve. Their friendship reminds us that children often see beyond the artificial divisions we create. Perhaps most importantly, this story challenges us to consider how justice and healing can coexist. Tanya's pain couldn't be erased, but through acknowledgement, restitution, and ongoing effort, a path forward emerged. True reconciliation requires not just apology but sustained action to right wrongs and create a more equitable future. What would you do if you discovered someone had wronged you or your loved ones in the past? Would you seek revenge, demand justice, or work toward healing? Comment below with your thoughts. If this story touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about unexpected connections and second chances. Share this video with someone who might need to believe in the possibility of redemption today. Thank you for watching, and remember, it's never too late to right a wrong and change the course of someone's future.